Urgent breaking news from Europe and the world. Elon Musk calls German Scholz a fool. The tech billionaire, emboldened by Donald Trump's U.S. election victory, is clashing with the Berlin chancellor. Billionaire Elon Musk called German Chancellor Olaf Scholz a fool on Thursday after his three-party coalition collapsed. Responding to a post about Scholz's government's downfall, he said in German, Olaf ist ein Narr, which translates to Olaf is a fool. When a follower asked if he was referring to the German chancellor, Musk responded with emojis. Trump indicated he would reward his billionaire supporter, promising in a September speech to create a government efficiency commission headed by Musk if he won the election. But Musk is on a collision course with European officials, battling regulators and governments on multiple fronts. He's been criticized for his management of X, facing accusations that he allowed hate speech to flourish on the site. The latest event in his ongoing battle with the EU is the European Commission's possible move to consider his other companies, including SpaceX and Neuralink, when calculating a potential fine against X for violating the Digital Services Act's content moderation law. Up next, Netanyahu hopes to revive his friendship with Trump. The Israeli leader wasted no time in welcoming Trump's victory as the greatest comeback in history. "I'm not going to start wars. I'm going to stop wars," Donald Trump promised in his victory speech. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his right-wing coalition partners say that this does not apply to wars in Gaza or Lebanon. They haven't finished those yet. Their ultimate goal is Iran. Netanyahu will hope to entice Trump to support his grand strategy to redraw the Middle East, with no place for clerical sponsors of Hamas and Hezbollah. He will, of course, remember that Trump was a supporter of the maximum pressure strategy on Iran. "Bibi would wake up to the news of Trump's victory with a smile from ear to ear," said Nadav Strauch, Netanyahu's former strategist. "Now he has a friend in the White House, and that's a huge thing. And that can change a lot. First and foremost, Bibi is thinking about Iran." The Israeli leader wasted no time in welcoming Trump's victory as the greatest comeback in history. "Your historic return to the White House offers a new beginning for our alliance, reaffirming the commitment to the great alliance between Israel and America," he wrote on X. "This is a huge victory." Up next, Trump's win gives British Brexit leader Nigel Farage a whiff of power. The leading Brexit supporter is emboldened across the Atlantic. While much of the world watches with trepidation the resurgence of Donald Trump, for Nigel Farage it's nothing short of good news. The godfather of Brexit already enjoyed a remarkable comeback this year, and the shocking result of this week's U.S. election will only strengthen his conviction that he can go even further. Farage, who leads the young right-wing Reform UK party, first secured a seat in the UK Parliament in the general election in July, helping to dent the Conservative vote. The party was ousted from power, and he's now aiming to siphon votes away from the Labour Party, who came to power following that rout, with a mission to cut short Keir Starmer's time in office, just as Trump did by limiting the Democrats' rule in the U.S. to one term. Farage's Reform colleague, Richard Tice, wrote after Trump's victory that it was a wholesale rejection of the status quo and voters were tired of the classic smooth operators who talked a good game but didn't deliver. Up next, the end of Pax Americana when the U.S. swears in Donald Trump as its 47th president. The country and the world will change dramatically because of it. Ivo Daalder, former U.S. ambassador to NATO, is CEO of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs and host of the weekly podcast World Review. Ivo Daalder writes a column, Across the Pond, in the magazine. In the end, it wasn't even close. Donald Trump became the first U.S. president since Grover Cleveland in 1893 to be re-elected after losing the previous election, and he's only the second Republican to win the popular vote in 36 years. Trump won decisively. He helped Republicans take control of the Senate and may well help them retain the House, giving them one-party control over all three branches of government. He can rightfully claim a mandate to enact all the policies he campaigned on. "I will govern under a simple motto," he declared in his victory speech. Promises made, promises kept. And he made a lot of promises. Trump will be a dictator on day one. He'll deport 15 million or more illegal immigrants. He'll send the army against his critics. He'll persecute the media, and the Justice Department will institute a loyalty test for civil servants and end federal prosecutions of his past actions. All the while, he'll be protected by the Supreme Court, which has already ruled that a president cannot be prosecuted for his official actions. Up next, Spy Trio. Among other things, these household appliances secretly send your data. No household is without household appliances. In addition to conventional variants, there are countless smart models that are constantly connected to the internet and smartphone. Some of them, however, also seem to be connected to China. These household appliances can spy. A new study by the Verbraucherzentrale Bundesverband, VZBV, shows the extent to which smart household appliances collect user data. It's surprising that everything from an inconspicuous air fryer to a smart TV is included, as the Consumer Protection Organization proves. Manufacturers collect ever more information that, in some cases, can also be passed on to third parties, including for advertising purposes. The analysis was conducted on 4 categories of devices and led to an overall data security rating of the tested models. It was noticeable that especially with the use of intelligent devices, extensive location data and microphone access were requested, which go beyond the pure functionality. Air fryers, smartwatches, and TVs were checked. One example is the air fryer category, where all 3 devices tested required such access. Well-known brands, including Acer and SMEG, request information such as gender and date of birth during setup, the necessity of which remains unclear for the operation of the device. 2 air fryers also transmit personal data to servers in China, but they indicate this in their privacy policy. The leader in the number of access permissions is the Huawei Watch GT, which requires a total of 9 permissions classified as sensitive. This includes precise location data and access to all apps installed on the smartphone. Huawei emphasizes that the permissions are necessary for functional reasons and that users in certain regions can also do without the trackers. A look at smart speakers. A similar situation applies to loudspeakers, for example. While the app for the Boss Home portable speaker gets by with a minimum of initial permissions, the app includes numerous trackers, including Facebook and Google. In contrast, Amazon offers options to reject certain data requests. However, consumers need an Amazon or Google account to use Echo Pop or Nest Mini. Sources. This article was created with AI assistance and was carefully checked by editors before publication. Up next, he particularly touched on the topic of populism and the role of Donald Trump. Fleischhauer sees Trump as a phenomenon that has attracted worldwide attention and may also influence German politics. Fleischhauer explains that populism is currently a worldwide phenomenon and that this could also affect the Bundestag elections. He believes the AfD could benefit from this wave of populism, regardless of whether the elections are postponed or not. Fleischhauer explained that Trump promised people to represent their interests. This is a program that the majority parties could also take a look at, he said. Trump considered the interests of his voters and Americans in general and was favorably disposed to anything that benefited America. Anything he thinks makes America look bad or is ripped off, for example in defense, he looks at very critically, adds Fleischhauer. More populism in Germany. He emphasized that if it is populism, it is a model that could also be copied in Germany. I wouldn't mind honestly, he said. Fleer also addresses Trump's rhetorical abilities and describes him as a dazzling personality. He emphasizes that many voters will take Trump's exaggeration with humor. Olaf couldn't do that in 1,000 years, Fleischhauer says. Trump's rhetoric is a natural talent that no one can easily imitate. Olaf couldn't do that in one of his other reincarnations in 1,000 years, he said. He emphasizes that Trump's speeches often have an almost lyrical quality that is unique. In conclusion, Fleer notes that this kind of populism would probably not come to Germany. Up next, expert believes Germany has fallen behind. Britain could become Trump's privileged partner. Political scientist and professor of security and strategic studies at the University of Bonn, Ulrich Schlie, expects that the renewed presidency of Donald Trump will lead to noticeable changes in transatlantic relations. Germany should not lose itself in government crises, but should focus its efforts on international hotspots. Mr. Schlie, in the U.S. elections, contrary to all forecasts of a tight race, Americans clearly chose Donald Trump. Was this result logical or unexpected? What was surprising was that all forecasts predicted a close race. However, the result once again shows that opinion polls can differ significantly from actual results. The clarity is surprising, but it can also be explained by the great mood that has been felt in the United States in recent months, especially in rural areas. Trump was elected despite his mistakes, unpredictability, and egocentricity. That is, the result was predictably unpredictable but explainable. And it also shows that Donald Trump, despite all his mistakes, his unpredictability, and his egocentricity, is ultimately elected by the majority of Americans. European countries are turning to the U.S. How will Germany's relations with the U.S. develop? Germany will continue to lag behind. It is already apparent that other European partners in the European Union are preparing to play a different role vis-a-vis the United States. Relations with the U.S. serve Germany's interests. That is, you expect that Great Britain, Hungary, and Italy will again curry favor with the U.S. This is a snapshot. International relations are always about representing national interests. In Germany's interest is also to maintain relations with the United States at a good and high level, regardless of who is president. Who will have the most in common with Donald Trump from Germany in the next 4 years, Olaf Scholz or CDU leader Friedrich Merz? This is a speculative question that must be decided by the voters in Germany. Nevertheless, the demand on every future chancellor is to cultivate good relations with the U.S. president. Up next, Scholz briefly became Trump. What was going on in the chancellor when he sacked Lindner? German Chancellor Olaf Scholz publicly sacked Finance Minister Christian Lindner. Scholz accused him of breach of trust, uncompromising and liberal tactics. What was going on inside the chancellor? The chancellor dismissed his finance minister, Christian Lindner, because of ongoing dissonance. What was going on in Scholz? Alina Wilm. The level of escalation went far beyond normal dissonance, which is why Scholz had to act reactively. With sound leadership and winning communication, Scholz could have proactively de-escalated beforehand to get ahead of the situation in his important leadership role as Chancellor of our country. He did not do this because it does not correspond to his personality type. His previous behavior has shown rather passively avoidant personality traits and conflict avoidance, since neither political crises nor intra-coalition ones occur. Parallel escalation of several hot spots, letting these fires flare up by themselves. Scholz paradoxically catapulted himself into a position where he ultimately had no choice but to finally make a final decision and implement it. So he cornered himself, so to speak. In such traumatic or extremely crisis-ridden, hopeless stress situations, the psyche regularly switches to the opposite mode. Then the inner excitement is so great that an emotional surge of strength arises, and the person suddenly reacts in a direction opposite to the one he would otherwise have preferred. Up next, so dumb. What exactly did Scholz say when he fired Lindner? The traffic light is history for a good day, and more details are emerging about how the coalition finally fell apart. Now a report reveals what Scholz said to Lindner when he fired him. This was the last major duel of the coalition, which has been feuding for more than 3 years. Olaf Scholz versus Chancellor Christian Lindner versus Finance Minister. To suspend the debt brake and keep it in place at the historic coalition committee on Wednesday evening, which ultimately meant the end of the traffic light. Scholz and Lindner had a final showdown. The Greens had long since only been watching. The newspaper gathered opinions from various circles of participants, which paint a clearer picture of this showdown and reveal how Scholz fired Lindner from office. First, Scholz presents a package of economic measures, which, according to his own statements, are far from compatible with the FDP. In Lindner's opinion, it is not a sufficient package. It is linked to the demand to suspend the debt brake in order to outsource 12.5 billion euros from the budget, billions that will be earmarked for, among other things, the integration of refugees. Scholz fires Lindner and then says, "So dumb." But Lindner refuses. The FDP asks for a break. During the break, Lindner's proposal for new elections leaked to build a great insult to the SPD. An interesting side aspect. The Greens remain in the room while the FDP and SPD go into consultations. This was followed by the FDP's return and another confirmation by Lindner that he would not suspend the debt brake. Then Scholz had enough. "Dear Christian, I don't want you to be part of my cabinet anymore. And tomorrow morning I will ask the federal president to dismiss you." He quotes participants. After that, silence. Nirvana situation, say those present. The coalition is history. And then Scholz adds, so dumb. Then some hugs, some handshakes and goodbye. Up next, traffic light ministers get high pensions. Only the political favorite should tremble. The premature breakup of the traffic light government is disrupting the ministers' career plans. Nevertheless, despite the new elections, they don't have to worry about their pensions. Pensions are regulated by Section 15 of the Federal Minister Act, BMG. As a rule, chancellors and ministers are only entitled to a pension after 4 years in office, reports Welt. But in the case of a premature dissolution of the federal government, there is an exception. In the case of a dissolution of the Bundestag and continuous service in the federal government for more than 2 years, this is considered a term of office of 4 years. Pistorius will miss 4 crucial days. If Chancellor Olaf Scholz, SPD, had filed a motion of no confidence on January 15th, as announced, all ministers except one would have fulfilled this condition. Only Defense Minister Boris Pistorius, SPD, has to worry, as he would then lack 4 days to reach the 2-year limit. His inauguration was on January 19, 2023. Nevertheless, the previous ministers remain in their posts as acting ministers even after the loss of a vote of confidence, which still gives Pistorius a good chance to meet the requirements. Defense Minister Boris Pistorius is the most popular politician in Germany, according to polls. Further, Welt reports that the ministers' pensions are at least €5,500 per month, an increase with the length of their term of office. For each additional year in office, the percentage increases by just under 2.4 percentage points to a maximum of 71.75%. A transitional allowance is also paid for 6 months to 2 years after leaving office. Up next, stock market legend Heiko Thieme on how to invest after the U.S. election. Stock markets reacted almost euphorically to the election of Donald Trump as U.S. president. Will the euphoria continue? What should investors pay attention to now? Answers from stock market legend Heiko Thieme in conversation with Marcus Voss. For several weeks, the so-called Trump trade has driven up shares in companies that are expected to benefit from a renewed Donald Trump presidency. But when victory became clear, the stock market went even further. The Dow Jones Index rose by almost 1,400 points. Shares such as Tesla temporarily rose by 15%. Can this continue? Is it worthwhile to enter now? If so, in which markets and for which assets? Our stock market expert Marcus Voss spoke with investment strategist Heiko Thieme, who, among other things, spent more than 10 years as chief investment strategist at Deutsche Bank in New York and has 30 years of experience in the stock market. Thieme lives in Europe and the USA. The interview focuses on the following topics: the new, unpredictable role of Donald Trump, whom Thieme at one point also calls King Trump, the expected consequences of Donald Trump's economic policy, Thieme's latest forecast for the S&P 500, the best stock market phase of the year that is just beginning, 2 simple investment ideas for everyone, and an interesting bet on automobiles. Up next, Political Insider slams 2 things unworthy of a chancellor. Even if the end of the traffic light is a salvation, Chancellor Olaf Scholz must not take Germany hostage for reasons of power, says publisher Wolfram Weimer in an interview. After months of disputes within the government, the traffic light is finally history. Given the unpopularity of the coalition of the SPD, Greens, and FDP, this is a salvation, says publisher Wolfram Weimer in an interview with the online publication. The fact that there are now early elections is also good news. How the end of the traffic light came about shocks even the political insider. The traffic light ends with us having a chancellor glued to his chair. That's a big problem, of course, and also unworthy. The resignation of Finance Minister Christian Lindner was orchestrated by Chancellor Olaf Scholz. He wanted to make the FDP a scapegoat. It was planned. He wanted to throw Lindner out and then shout bad things after him. Pathetic words. But it's all part of the election campaign that's been going on for a long time now. Weimer criticized Scholz's style and his election tactics. Weimer accuses Scholz of 2 things unworthy of a chancellor. First, the style with which you end something like this. Despite all the power struggles, disputes over opinions, and party squabbling, people treat each other decently and politely. That didn't happen at all here. The fact that Scholz doesn't want new elections before March is also purely for electoral reasons. The Chancellor hopes that the SPD will emerge well from the parliamentary elections in Hamburg on March 2nd, which will ultimately help him. Scholz is punishing Germany with this game of suspense. The federal government has long lost the support of the population and no longer has a parliamentary majority. New elections have long been overdue. That is, of course, a strong thing. Scholz announced a vote of no confidence on January 15th. The Bundestag elections will not take place before March. Advice on the political surfing. Leadership expert Harky Shore calls Scholz's emotional reckoning with Lindner unworthy of a chancellor. Up next, China not afraid of Trump tariffs. Stock markets in East Asia and Australia are mostly up. Chinese stock markets, in particular, are rising after starting the day with losses. In Shanghai, the composite index rose by 1.1%. In Hong Kong, the Hang Seng index recovered from a more significant dip by 1.2% the previous day. While, on the one hand, higher-than-expected Chinese exports instill some confidence, on the other hand, the prospect of further escalation of trade disputes does not weigh heavily on China. The U.S. under the administration of yesterday's presidential election winner, Donald Trump. Moreover, hopes for large-scale fiscal stimulus are alive. They could be announced on Friday, the last day of the current session of the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress, analysts at Nomura believe. In connection with Trump's victory, Beijing may announce an intensification of fiscal stimuli. New or higher U.S. tariffs could put pressure on Chinese exports, but the impact on Chinese GDP may be less than many fear, economists at Capital Economics believe. Morgan Stanley economists share the view that China has diversified since 2017. Against this backdrop, the growth break for China could be less than the 1 percentage point we saw in 2018 to 2019. However, the final effect also depends on China's political response. However, a 10% tariff for the rest of the world in addition to tariffs on China will repeat the growth slowdown in 2018 to 2019, Morgan Stanley added. In Tokyo, the Nikkei fell 0.3%. The Caspian Sol is now up 0.4% after an initial decline. Up next, Scholz shows Lindner where the frog has curls. With disgrace and ignominy, Olaf Scholz throws his former finance minister out of the federal chancellery. Apart from personal insults towards Christian Lindner, this step above all shows Scholz cooked Lindner when he mistakenly sensed an advantage. When Christian Lindner presented an 18-page list of demands at the end of last week, it confirmed long-standing speculation that the FDP is aiming for an exit from the traffic light coalition. In general, Lindner's proposals were nothing more than evidence that he considers the economic, budgetary, social, and environmental policies of the SPD and the Greens to be fundamentally wrong. He could not seriously expect his coalition partners to agree with this assessment and would eagerly follow the FDP's economic turn. Lindner falls into the trap. Scholz acknowledged that this time he is actually aiming for an end and that he is not just bluffing. Unlike Lindner, he thought through and prepared the procedure and communication of this break. Grateful for Scholz, Lindner also left the Chancellor responsible for the action with his list of demands. In unison with Robert Habeck, he did not miss a single opportunity to remind him of the joint responsibility of the government in unstable times. The victory of Donald Trump in the election was interpreted in political Berlin as an event that would bring the traffic light closer together. Presumably, the FDP also expected concessions from its coalition partners after Trump's clear victory.